The phone call came at 3:47 a.m. I remember the exact time because I was staring at the ceiling of my cramped studio apartment, unable to sleep going over the numbers for my third startup attempt. When I saw Jason's name flash across the screen, my heart dropped. My assistant never called this late unless something monumental had happened. "Claire, he's dead," Jason's voice cracked through the speaker. "Your uncle. Heart attack. 2 hours ago." I sat up in bed, the thin sheets falling away. For a moment I felt nothing. Then came the flood. Not grief. Not exactly. Something more complicated, more twisted. Because the man who had thrown me out of his penthouse 5 years ago, who had chosen his spoiled niece Natalie over me, who had told me I was nothing but a burden he never asked for, that man, had just opened a door I thought was forever. Closed. "There's more," Jason continued, his excitement barely contained. "The will reading is in 3 days. Claire, I think this is it. I think this is your moment." I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere out there, 30 blocks north, was Montgomery Estates. The penthouse. The empire my uncle had built. The kingdom that should have been mine. "Get me everything," I said, my voice steady, now cold. Every detail about his death, about the funeral arrangements, about who's positioning themselves for what. And Jason dust off Plan B. "It's time." Before we go any further, if you're enjoying this story of revenge and redemption, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear how this unfolds, and drop a comment below telling me what you would do in Claire's situation. Now let me take you back to where it all began, because you need to understand exactly what they did to me and why what I'm about to do is nothing less than justice. 5 years earlier, I was a different person. God, I hate thinking about that version of myself. Weak, desperate for approval, willing to sacrifice everything for people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient tool. I was 19 when my parents died in a car accident. One moment, I had a family, a home, a future mapped out at Columbia University. The next moment, I had nothing except a distant uncle I'd met maybe 3 times at family reunions. Richard Montgomery, real estate mogul, Manhattan's wolf in Armani suits. He took me in, but not out of love. That became clear within the first week. I arrived at his penthouse with 2 suitcases and a grief so heavy I could barely breathe. His assistant showed me to a small room not much bigger than a closet, while Natalie, his actual niece, had a suite that could fit my entire childhood home. "You'll earn your keep," Uncle Richard told me that first night at dinner. We sat at a table that could seat 20, just the 3 of us scattered at one end. Natalie picked at her food, scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging my existence. "I'm not running a charity. You're family, so I won't throw you out, but you'll work for everything you get here." I nodded, grateful. Grateful. Can you imagine? I was grateful to be treated like hired help in my own uncle's home. The next 3 years were a masterclass in psychological abuse, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. I worked. God, did I work. I attended Columbia during the day, taking a full course load in business and finance. But my evenings, my weekends, my holidays belonged to Uncle Richard. I managed his calendar. I organized his files. I handled his dry cleaning, his dinner reservations, his mother's birthday gifts. When Natalie needed someone to cover for her during her frequent shopping trips and party nights, I filled in at the Montgomery Estates office, learning the business from the ground up, not because anyone was training me, but because I was desperate to prove my worth. "Claire, I need you to pick up my dress from Bergdorf," Natalie would say, not ask, tossing her credit card at me like I was the help. Which I suppose I was. "Claire, cancel your study group tonight." "I need these reports compiled by morning," Uncle Richard would bark, dropping a stack of folders on my desk at 9 p.m. I said yes to everything. Every single thing. I rearranged my life around their needs, their whims, their convenience. I told myself it was temporary, that if I just worked hard enough, proved myself valuable enough, Uncle Richard would see me. Really see me. Maybe even love me like the daughter he never had. I was so desperate for family that I couldn't see I was being used. The breaking point started small, like these things always do. It was the summer after my junior year. I had been offered an incredible internship at Goldman Sachs. Competitive, prestigious, the kind of opportunity that could launch a career. I was ecstatic when I got the acceptance email. "Absolutely not," Uncle Richard said when I told him. We were in his study and he didn't even look up from his laptop. "I need you here this summer. Natalie is going to Europe and someone has to manage the Montgomery Estates social calendar. The charity galas alone will take up all your time. But Uncle Richard, this internship, it could change everything for me. It's only 10 weeks. He finally looked at me, his expression cold. You live under my roof. You eat my food. You owe me. Or have you forgotten that? Without me, you'd be in some foster home or on the streets. This internship will still be there next year. Family comes first, Claire. I thought you understood that. The guilt was instantaneous, crushing. He was right, wasn't he? I owed him everything. What was 10 weeks compared to the years he'd given me? I turned down the internship. I spent that summer addressing envelopes, coordinating caterers, and watching Natalie's Instagram stories from Santorini, Mykonos, and the Amalfi Coast, while I worked 16-hour days to make sure her mother's charity luncheon went off without a hitch. That fall senior year, things got worse. Uncle Richard's company was going through a rough patch. Some bad investments, some developments that didn't pan out. He needed capital, and he needed it fast. I didn't know this at the time. I was too busy trying to finish my thesis while managing his increasingly chaotic schedule. One evening in October, he called me into his study. Natalie was there too, lounging on the leather sofa, looking like a cat that had gotten into the cream. Claire, sit down. We need to discuss your future. I sat hopeful. Maybe this was it. Maybe he was finally going to offer me a real position at Montgomery Estates after graduation. Maybe all the work, all the sacrifice was about to pay off. Your parents had a life insurance policy, he began. When they died, you were the beneficiary. The money has been in a trust waiting for you to turn 21. That happens next month. My heart soared. I had forgotten about the trust. My parents had never talked about money, but I vaguely remembered my father mentioning something about life insurance once. This could be my ticket to independence, to starting my own life. How much is it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. $350,000. I couldn't breathe. That was a fortune. That was freedom. That was everything I needed to start over, to launch my own business, to finally step out of Uncle Richard's shadow. I need you to invest it in Montgomery Estates. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for the indication that he was joking. But his face was stone. What? The company needs capital. You've seen the books, you know how things are. This is a sure thing, Claire. A guaranteed return. And it's the least you can do after everything I've done for you. Natalie is investing her trust fund too, isn't that right, sweetheart? Natalie nodded, though. Her smile told me she knew something I didn't. But Uncle Richard, that's my parents' money. That's all I have left of them. That's supposed to be for my future. His expression hardened. Your future is here with family. Unless you're planning to abandon us after we took you in. After we gave you a home when you had nothing. Is that the kind of person you are, Claire? Ungrateful. The word hit its mark. Ungrateful. I had spent 3 years trying desperately not to be ungrateful. The thought of being seen that way was unbearable. I need to think about it, I managed to say. You have until your birthday. 1 month. He turned back to his computer, dismissing me like I was nothing. I didn't sleep for weeks. I ran the numbers 1,000 times. I consulted my finance professors, who all advised against it. Never invest everything in one place, they said. Especially not in a struggling real estate company. But every time I considered saying no, I thought about Uncle Richard's face, his words. Ungrateful. Boden. Everything I've done for you. On my 21st birthday, there was no party, no celebration. Just paperwork in a lawyer's office. I signed over $350,000 to Montgomery Estates. Uncle Richard barely acknowledged it, just a brief nod before he left to take a call. Natalie was more direct. As we left the office, she leaned in close, her perfume choking. You're such a sucker, she whispered. Did you really think he cared about you? You're just the poor relation who's useful to have around. At least now you've finally paid proper rent. I should have known then. All the signs were there, blazing like neon in the darkness. But I pushed them down, told myself she was just being cruel, that Uncle Richard would prove me right, that this investment would pay off and we'd all be better for it. 6 months later, I graduated from Columbia. Top of my class in my finance concentration. I had job offers from 3 major firms. Uncle Richard told me to turn them all down. I need you at Montgomery Estates full-time now, he said. You're invested in the company, you might as well work to protect your investment. Besides, you know the business better than anyone. I'm making you my personal assistant. It's a great opportunity. What's the salary? I asked, trying to sound professional. We'll start you at $40,000 a year. Plus room and board, of course. Very generous for an entry-level position. Entry-level. After 3 years of unpaid labor, after investing my entire inheritance, $40,000 in Manhattan was poverty wages barely enough to survive. But I took it because what else was I going to do? My money was tied up in his company. I had to make it work. That was when I started to wake up. Slowly, painfully, I began to see what had been done to me. Natalie got a position as director of special projects at $120,000 a year. She came in 3 days a week, usually hungover, did maybe 2 hours of real work, and spent the rest of her time planning her next vacation. I worked 70-hour weeks. I managed Uncle Richard's entire professional life. I put out fires, I handled difficult clients, I renovated troubled properties. When a major deal in Brooklyn started to fall apart, I was the one who flew out there, spent 2 weeks sleeping in budget hotels, and salvaged the whole thing. The deal ended up netting Montgomery Estates $8.7 million. Uncle Richard took the credit. Natalie got the bonus $50,000 for consultation. I got a thank you email. That was my life for 2 years. Watching my inheritance slowly disappear into a company that paid me scraps while enriching everyone else. Living in a closet-sized room while Natalie redecorated her suite for the 3rd time. Eating leftovers from their dinner parties while they flew first class to Paris. But I was learning. God, was I learning. I was learning how to read commercial real estate contracts, how to identify undervalued properties, how to negotiate with contractors and city officials, how to structure deals and identify market trends. I was getting an education worth millions, even if I was paying for it with my dignity. And I started planning. Late at night in my tiny room, I began to build something of my own. I saved every penny I could. I started a small consulting side business helping other small real estate companies with market analysis. I networked obsessively, building relationships with everyone from property managers to city council members to rival developers. I called it Plan B. If the family thing didn't work out, if Uncle Richard never recognized my value, I would have my own path forward. I wasn't going to be dependent on their approval forever. The final straw came on a Tuesday in March, 3 years after I'd given them my inheritance. I had been working on a massive project, a development in Queens that could revitalize an entire neighborhood. It was my baby, my design, my negotiations. 6 months of 18-hour days. The contracts were ready to sign pending board approval from Montgomery Estates. I walked into the board meeting that morning, confident. This was it. This was the project that would finally prove my worth, that would force Uncle Richard to see me as more than just useful help. The meeting room was full. Uncle Richard sat at the head of the table, Natalie beside him. The other board members, mostly elderly men who'd been with the company for decades, filled the remaining seats. I took my place standing behind Uncle Richard, ready to present. Before we begin, Uncle Richard announced, I have an important announcement. Natalie will be presenting the Queens Development Project today. I felt the floor drop away beneath me. I'm sorry, what? Natalie stood up, smiling. She had a folder in her hands, my folder, my research, my contracts, my project. I've been working on this development for the past 6 months, she began, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She was presenting my work. Word for word, she went through my analysis, my proposals, my negotiations. She fielded questions like she'd done the work. And Uncle Richard sat there nodding approvingly like a proud father. I tried to interrupt once. Excuse me, but I actually... Claire, please. This is a formal presentation. Uncle Richard cut me off, not even looking at me. His dismissal was so casual, so complete, like I was a servant interrupting the adults. The board approved the project unanimously. They congratulated Natalie. One of the older board members actually said, "Richard, your niece is brilliant. You must be so proud." And Uncle Richard smiled, put his arm around Natalie, and said, "She's everything I could have hoped for." I stood there invisible. My work, my sleepless nights, my brilliant negotiations, all credited to someone who couldn't even explain the zoning regulations when one board member asked a follow-up question. I had to feed her the answer in a whisper, and she repeated it like it was her own thought. After the meeting, I confronted Uncle Richard in his office. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice level. That was my project. 6 months of my life. You know, I did that work. He looked up from his phone, irritated by the interruption. And you'll get your salary for it. What else do you want, Claire? Aparade. You work for this company. The work you do belongs to the company. Natalie is being groomed for leadership. She needs wins on her record. Your support staff. That's the reality. Support staff. I've saved this company millions. I've worked 80-hour weeks. I invested everything I had. And you've been compensated. You have a roof over your head, food on the table. You're being dramatic. My inheritance was an investment that you chose to make. No one forced you. If you're unhappy with the returns, that's a lesson in due diligence, isn't it? His smile was cruel. Maybe you're not as smart as you think you are. Something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked. Like ice beginning to splinter before the thaw. I want to be on the next board meeting agenda. I want to present my own work from now on. He actually laughed. Claire, you don't have board authority. You're not a stakeholder with voting rights. Your investment bought you shares, but not the kind that come with a seat at the table. You should have read the fine print. The fine print. Of course. He had structured my investment to give me no actual power in the company. I own shares, but they were non-voting shares, worthless except as a financial instrument. And given how the company was actually performing under his leadership, they were rapidly becoming worthless even in that regard. I see, I said quietly. Good. Now I need you to handle something for me. Natalie needs an apartment, something in Soho. Find her 3 options by Friday, schedule the viewings, and negotiate the leases. Her budget is $15,000 a month. $15,000 a month. More than I made in 4 months. For an apartment she didn't need because she already lived in the penthouse. I walked out of his office in a daze. The world had shifted, and suddenly I could see everything clearly. The pattern of abuse, the systematic way they had isolated me, used me, and drained me of everything I had to give. I wasn't family. I had never been family. I was a resource to be exploited. That night, sitting in my closet room, I pulled out my laptop and started really digging. If I was going to leave, I needed to understand exactly what had been done to me. I accessed the company files, all the documents I'd been managing for years, but never really analyzed for my own benefit. What I found made me physically ill. My $350,000 investment had been used to cover Uncle Richard's gambling debts. Not invested in the company at all, just transferred directly to pay off bookies and casinos. It was all documented because he'd been careless, arrogant enough to think no one would ever check. Natalie's trust fund investment was a fabrication. She'd never invested a dime. That was just a story to manipulate me into compliance. The company was hemorrhaging money not because of bad market conditions, but because of gross mismanagement. Uncle Richard was taking massive distributions for personal expenses, while the actual business operations starved. Properties were being neglected, deals were falling through, and the whole empire was held together by duct tape and my unpaid overtime. And my shares, they were structured so that if I ever left the company, they'd automatically be bought back at the price I'd paid for them, not their current market value. If the company went bankrupt, I'd get nothing. The whole thing was designed to trap me in place, forever working to protect an investment I'd never benefit from. I should have been furious. Instead, I felt coldly crystalline clear. This wasn't a family that had disappointed me. This was a con, and I had been the mark. The only question now was what I was going to do about it. I spent the next 3 weeks planning. I copied every document I could access, building a comprehensive record of Uncle Richard's financial mismanagement and outright theft. I reached out to my network, the one I'd been carefully cultivating, and I started looking for opportunities outside Montgomery Estates. Then I packed a bag, just one, with only what I couldn't replace. In the middle of the night, I walked out of the penthouse and didn't look back. The next morning, I sent Uncle Richard an email. Short, professional, devastating. I resign effective immediately. I've removed my personal belongings. Please have my final paycheck and all documentation regarding my investment sent to my lawyer, whose information is below. I will no longer be available to handle your affairs. Best of luck with your endeavors. His response came within an hour. You're making a huge mistake. You'll never work in this city again. I'll make sure of it. But I was already gone. I'd taken a tiny studio apartment in Bushwick, barely affordable on my savings. I had 3 months of runway before I'd run out of money completely. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in 5 years, I belonged to myself. The first startup failed. A real estate tech platform that was ahead of its time but underfunded. I learned from it. The second startup failed. A property management service that couldn't scale fast enough. I learned from that too. By the third attempt, I'd figured out what I'd been doing wrong. I wasn't trying to compete with the giants. I was trying to be smart and lean and find the angles no one else was watching. I started a consulting firm that helped struggling real estate companies turn around their operations. Everything I'd learned from watching Montgomery Estates nearly collapse, I used to help others avoid the same fate. It was slow at first. Then one of my clients, a small developer in Brooklyn, hit it big on a project I'd advised on. Suddenly I had credibility. More clients came. I raised my rates. I hired Jason, brilliant and loyal and exactly the kind of partner I needed. Within 2 years, I'd made my first million. Real money earned by my own work, owing nothing to anyone. I lived modestly, reinvesting everything into the business. I became known in the industry as someone who could see the angles, who understood not just the numbers, but the psychology of real estate development. And I watched Montgomery Estates from a distance. I watched Uncle Richard make mistake after mistake. I watched Natalie get promoted to vice president despite running multiple projects into the ground. I watched the company's value slowly decline, my worthless shares becoming more worthless by the quarter. I didn't gloat. I was too busy building something real. But I remembered everything. Every humiliation, every theft, every casual cruelty. I remembered, and I waited because I knew something Uncle Richard didn't understand. Empires built on exploitation don't last. Eventually the foundation crumbles. That's when Jason's call came. 3:47 in the morning, 5 years after I'd walked away. Uncle Richard was dead and everything was about to change. The funeral was scheduled for Friday at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Ostentatious, expensive, exactly the kind of show Uncle Richard would have wanted. I spent the 3 days between his death and the funeral preparing. Not emotionally, I'd done that grief work years ago, mourning not the man but the uncle I'd wished he'd been. No, I prepared strategically. I had Jason compile everything. Uncle Richard's current financial status. Montgomery Estates' actual health, not the picture they painted for investors, but the real numbers. Natalie's role in the company and her spectacular record of failure. The board composition. The potential vultures circling ready to pick apart whatever was left. And I prepared myself. The girl who'd left that penthouse in the middle of the night was gone. In her place was a woman who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd learned to be ruthless when necessary, who understood that power wasn't given, it was taken. On Friday morning, I stood in front of my closet, in my now considerably nicer apartment in Tribeca. Jason had asked me what I was going to wear, and I just smiled. This wasn't about fashion. This was about armor. I chose a black suit Tom Ford cut to perfection. Not because of the label, but because it fit like a second skin and made me look like exactly what I'd become, a force to be reckoned with. I pulled my hair back in a sleek bun, applied minimal makeup, and looked at myself in the mirror. The reflection staring back at me wasn't the desperate girl who'd signed away her inheritance. This was someone who'd been forged in fire and come out steel. St. Patrick's Cathedral was packed. Apparently, Uncle Richard had more people who wanted to be seen at his funeral than people who actually mourned him. I arrived exactly on time, not early like a supplicant, not late like I was making an entrance. Just precisely on time, like someone who had important places to be. The moment I walked through those massive bronze doors, I felt the shift. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd. I heard fragments of conversation as I walked down the aisle. Is that Claire Reynolds? I thought she disappeared. Heard she's worth tens of millions now. Wonder what she's doing here. I kept my eyes forward, my expression neutral. The casket was at the front, surrounded by elaborate flower arrangements that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Natalie stood near it, dressed in Chanel, crying theatrically for the assembled crowd. Her mother, Uncle Richard's sister, dabbed at dry eyes with a handkerchief. I approached the casket and placed a simple arrangement of white roses on it. No card, no message. Just flowers. Then I turned to find a seat. That's when Natalie saw me. Her face went through a remarkable transformation. Shock, recognition, fury, all in the space of 2 seconds. She broke away from the group of mourners and stormed toward me, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. "What the hell are you doing here?" Her voice was low but venomous, conscious of the crowd but unable to contain her rage. I looked at her calmly. "Paying my respects. He was my uncle. He was my uncle. You were just some charity case he took pity on. You have no right to be here, not after you abandoned him, abandoned this family." "I didn't abandon anyone, Natalie. I left a toxic situation. There's a difference." "You ungrateful." "Choose your next words very carefully," I said softly, and something in my tone made her pause. This wasn't the girl she remembered, the one she could bully and belittle. We're in a church at a funeral surrounded by witnesses. Whatever you want to say to me can wait. Or better yet, don't say it at all. A man approached us, then older, distinguished with kind eyes that reminded me slightly of my father. He was probably in his 60s, well-dressed, but not ostentatiously so. "Natalie, perhaps we should let people pay their respects in peace," he said gently. Then he turned to me and extended his hand. "You must be Claire. I'm Robert Montgomery, Richard's younger brother. I don't believe we've ever met properly." I shook his hand surprised. I hadn't known Uncle Richard had a brother. He'd never mentioned family other than Natalie and her mother. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said. "And I for yours, my dear." Richard may have been complicated, but he was still family. His eyes held something I couldn't quite read. Sympathy. Knowledge. "I've heard quite a bit about you over the years. From various sources. I think we should talk after the service." Before I could respond, the funeral director was ushering everyone to their seats. The service was exactly what I expected. Long, pompous, full of speeches from business associates who praised Uncle Richard's acumen and vision while carefully avoiding any mention of his character. Natalie gave a tearful eulogy about what a wonderful father figure he'd been to her, how he'd taught her everything about business, how lost she was without his guidance. I sat in the back and felt nothing. Not sadness, not anger, not even satisfaction. Just a strange emptiness where all those complicated emotions had once been. This man had shaped so much of my life, mostly through his cruelty and neglect, and now he was gone and all I felt was tired. After the service, I was getting ready to leave when Robert Montgomery found me again. "Claire, please." "A moment." He guided me to a quiet corner of the cathedral. "The will reading is scheduled for Monday at 10 a.m. My brother's lawyer will be in touch with the details, but I wanted to make sure you knew to attend." "Why would I need to be there?" "I have no claim to anything." His smile was sad. "My brother was many things, Claire. Cruel, certainly. Manipulative, absolutely. But stupid. Never. He knew exactly what you were worth. He knew what he'd done to you. And in his own twisted way, I think he was trying to make amends. Or perhaps he just wanted to create one final bit of chaos. With Richard, it was always hard to tell. I don't understand. You will on Monday. Trust me. Be there." He pressed a business card into my hand. "And if you need anything before then, anything at all, please call me." I left the cathedral more confused than I'd entered it. Jason was waiting for me outside with the car. "How was it?" he asked as I slid into the back seat. "Complicated," I said. "There's a will reading on Monday. Are you going?" I looked out the window at the Manhattan streets, at the city that had chewed me up and spit me out and forced me to rebuild myself into something stronger. "Yes," I said finally. "I think I need to see how this story ends." The weekend passed in a blur. I tried to work, but I couldn't focus. I tried to relax, but my mind kept spinning through possibilities. What could Uncle Richard have possibly left me? An apology? A token gesture? Some final cruelty from beyond the grave? Monday morning arrived, cold and gray. I dressed carefully again, another suit, this one charcoal with a white silk blouse. Armor for battle, though. I wasn't sure yet who the enemy was. The lawyer's office was in Midtown, one of those old money firms that had been around since the Gilded Age. All dark wood paneling and leather furniture and an air of discretion that money could buy. Jason came with me, sitting in the waiting area while I was ushered into a conference room. Natalie was already there along with her mother and several people I didn't recognize. Probably other relatives, cousins, and second cousins drawn by the scent of inheritance. Robert Montgomery sat slightly apart from the others and he nodded at me when I entered. The lawyer, a severe woman in her 50s named Margaret Chen, waited until everyone was seated before beginning. "Thank you all for coming. I'll be reading the last will and testament of Richard Montgomery, executed 6 months before his death and superseding all previous wills." She opened a folder and began to read the standard legal language, the sound of my own heart beating, almost drowning out her words. Small bequests came first. 50,000 to Natalie's mother, 25,000 each to various cousins. A vintage car collection to some college friend. Natalie sat there smirking, clearly waiting for the main event. Then Margaret Chen paused, looked up, and her eyes found mine. "To my niece Claire Reynolds, I leave the following controlling interest in Montgomery Estates, consisting of 51% of all voting shares, the penthouse residence at 432 Park Avenue, and all properties and assets held by Montgomery Estates Holdings LLC." She paused. "This bequest comes with one condition. Claire Reynolds must assume active management of Montgomery Estates within 30 days and demonstrate profitable operation for a minimum of 6 consecutive months. If she fails to meet these conditions, or if she refuses the bequest, All assets will be liquidated and the proceeds donated to charity. The room erupted. Natalie was screaming, actually screaming, her face purple with rage. Her mother was shouting about lawyers and contests and this being fraud. Cousins I'd never met were demanding explanations. I sat frozen, unable to process what I'd just heard. Controlling interest. The penthouse. Everything. The empire that had chewed me up and spit me out was now mine if I wanted it. This is insane. Natalie was in Margaret Chen's face now. He hated her. He threw her out. This will is fake. It has to be fake. Miss Whitmore, please sit down, Margaret said calmly. The will was executed in the presence of multiple witnesses, all of whom can attest to your uncle's sound mind and clear intentions. If you wish to contest it, that is your right, but I assure you it will not succeed. Why? Natalie demanded, whirling to face me. Why would he give you anything? You abandoned him. I found my voice finally, though it came out steadier than I felt. Maybe because he realized that you've never built anything in your life, Natalie. You've only known how to destroy and consume. Maybe in the end he wanted his legacy in the hands of someone who actually understood what it meant to work for something. Robert Montgomery spoke up then. Richard called me 2 weeks before he died. He was drunk, which was unusual for him, and he was maudlin, which was even more unusual. He told me that he'd treated you terribly, Claire. He said he'd seen the reports about your company, seen what you'd built from nothing, and he realized he'd been wrong about you. He said you were the only one in the family who had his fire, his drive, but without his cruelty. He said Natalie would bankrupt the company within a year if she got control. That's a lie, Natalie shrieked. It's not, Robert said quietly. And deep down I think you know it. Richard was many things, but he was a good judge of talent and business sense. He knew Claire was the only one who could save what he'd built. Margaret Chen continued reading. Furthermore, Richard Montgomery left a personal letter for Claire Reynolds to be delivered upon reading of the will. She handed me an envelope, heavy cream-colored paper with my name written in Uncle Richard's sharp handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter inside was short. Claire, if you're reading this, I'm dead, which means I ran out of time to say this to your face. I was a bastard to you. I know it, I've always known it. I took your parents' death, and I used your grief and desperation to exploit you. I told myself I was teaching you strength, making you tough enough for this world, but that was bullshit. I was just cruel because I could be, because it made me feel powerful to have someone completely under my thumb. The truth is, you reminded me too much of myself at your age. Hungry, brilliant, willing to do anything to prove yourself. It scared me. Natalie was easy, soft, manageable. You were dangerous. So I tried to break you instead of build you up. I failed. I heard about your company, about what you've accomplished. You did it without my help, which makes it more impressive than anything I ever did. This is my apology. It's inadequate and it comes too late, but it's all I have to give. The company is yours if you want it. Save it or let it die. I don't care anymore. I just wanted you to know that I saw you, really saw you, even if I was too much of a coward to admit it while I was alive. You deserved better than me. I hope someday you can forgive the old bastard. R.M. I read it twice, feeling nothing and everything at once. An apology written by a dead man, too late to mean anything, and yet somehow meaning everything. I need time to think, I said, standing up. The room was still in chaos, Natalie demanding her lawyers, cousins arguing about legalities, but I needed air, needed space, needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do. Robert caught up with me in the hallway. What are you going to do? I don't know. This is insane. The company is probably a disaster. Natalie will fight me every step of the way, and I have my own business to run. Can I give you some advice? From someone who watched his brother destroy almost everything he touched, Robert's eyes were kind but serious. Take it. Not for him, not as forgiveness for what he did to you. Take it for yourself. Because you've already proven you can build something from nothing. Imagine what you could do with actual resources. And imagine the look on Natalie's face when you turn that dying company into something magnificent. I thought about it. About the girl who'd signed away her inheritance in a desperate bid for acceptance. About the woman I'd become forged in fire and failure and hard-won success. About Natalie's smug face when she'd stolen my project, when she'd mocked me for being poor, when she'd treated me like I was nothing. And I smiled. Not a nice smile. A dangerous one. I'll need to see the actual books. The real numbers, not the pretty pictures they paint for investors. And I'll need to know exactly who's on the board and who I can trust. Robert smiled back. I'll have everything sent over by tomorrow. And Claire, Welcome to the family business. The real one this time. The next 3 weeks were brutal. Jason and I worked around the clock digging through Montgomery Estates' financials. It was worse than I'd thought. Uncle Richard had left the company leveraged to the hilt bleeding cash with multiple properties, losing money, and several deals on the verge of collapse. In 6 months, maybe less, the whole thing would implode. But I could also see the potential. Solid assets being mismanaged. Good locations with terrible execution. A brand name that still meant something in certain circles. It was salvageable barely if someone competent took the wheel. I called my 3 biggest consulting clients and explained the situation. They were surprisingly supportive. 2 of them offered to invest in Montgomery Estates if I took over. The third offered to buy my consulting company, giving me the capital I'd need to stabilize the transition. On day 28, I made my decision. I was taking it. All of it. The company, the penthouse, the challenge, everything. Because Robert was right. I'd already proven I could build from nothing. Now I wanted to prove I could resurrect something dead and make it better than it had ever been. The day I officially took control of Montgomery Estates was a Thursday in April. I arrived at the office at 7 in the morning, 2 hours before anyone else, and I stood in Uncle Richard's office, my office now looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Jason found me there. "Boss, you ready for this?" "No," I admitted. But when have I ever been ready? The first board meeting was scheduled for 9. I knew it would be ugly. Natalie had spent the past month rallying support, trying to convince board members that I was incompetent, that the will was invalid, that I would destroy everything Uncle Richard had built. She had her mother there, several cousins, and 3 old guard board members who'd been with the company since its founding. I had Robert, Jason, and my reputation. It would have to be enough. When I walked into that boardroom, Natalie was already in Uncle Richard's old seat, her seat now, apparently her expression pure triumph. "Sorry, but that's my chair," I said pleasantly. "I've been acting CEO for the past month. I think I've earned it." "You've been acting CEO for the past month and managed to lose another $2 million. So please get up." For a moment, I thought she might actually fight me. But Robert stood up, his voice firm. "Natalie, the will was clear. Claire is the majority shareholder and the designated CEO. You need to respect that or leave." She got up slowly, her eyes promising murder. "This isn't over." No, I agreed. It's just beginning. I took my seat at the head of the table, the seat Uncle Richard had sat in for 30 years, and I began the meeting. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. I know many of you have concerns about the transition. You should. This company is in trouble. In approximately 5 months, if we continue on the current trajectory, we will be bankrupt. Every property we own will be foreclosed on, every employee will be jobless, and the Montgomery name will be worthless. That's the truth. Anyone want to argue?" Silence. Even Natalie looked uneasy. "Good. Now here's what's going to change. I've spent the past month analyzing every asset, every contract, every deal in progress. I've identified which properties are salvageable and which ones we need to cut loose immediately. I've found 3 major deals that were being criminally mismanaged, and I've already begun renegotiations. And I've identified approximately $15 million in unnecessary expenses, most of which went to executive compensation and perks for people who weren't actually producing results." I pulled up a presentation on the screen and I watched their faces change as they saw the numbers. Real numbers, undeniable numbers, showing exactly how close to the edge they really were. "Starting today, all executive salaries are frozen, including mine. All unnecessary expenses are eliminated. We're focusing exclusively on 3 core properties that have the best chance of profitability. Everything else gets sold or shuttered. Within 6 months, we'll be profitable again. Within a year, we'll be growing. Within 2 years, we'll be a completely different company." One of the old guard board members, Thomas Whitfield, raised his hand. "That's very ambitious, Miss Reynolds. But what makes you think you can succeed where Richard failed?" "Because Richard was more interested in looking successful than actually being successful. He cared about the appearance of wealth, the penthouse, the parties, the status symbols. I care about the actual business. And because unlike Richard, I've actually had to build something with my own 2 hands. I know what real work looks like." Natalie couldn't contain herself. "This is insane. You're going to destroy everything my uncle built. You're incompetent, you're inexperienced, and you're going to fail spectacularly." I smiled at her. "Natalie, you've been working for this company for 6 years. Can you name our 3 largest properties by square footage?" She blinked. What? Simple question. 3 largest properties. Name them. I don't deal with those details. Can you tell me our occupancy rate across the portfolio? I don't have those numbers memorized. Can you explain our current debt-to-equity ratio? This is ridiculous. Can you explain anything about how this company actually operates, or have you just been collecting a paycheck while the people around you did the real work? Her face went red. Several board members were trying not to smile. You've been stealing from this company for years, Natalie. Phantom consulting fees, expense account fraud, kickbacks from contractors. I have documentation of all of it. The only reason I haven't turned it over to the authorities yet is because I'm giving you a choice. You can resign quietly, take a small severance, and we'll all pretend you were merely incompetent rather than criminal. Or we can do this the hard way, and I promise you the hard way ends with you in a cell. You can't prove. I slid a folder across the table. That's a summary. The full documentation is with my lawyer. You have until the end of this meeting to decide. The room was silent. Natalie opened the folder, and I watched the color drain from her face as she saw the evidence. Years of it. Every fake invoice, every suspicious payment, every deal where she'd taken money under the table. I'd spent 3 weeks building this case, and it was ironclad. You're just like him, she said finally, her voice shaking. You're just as cruel as he was. No, I said. I'm better. Because I earned everything I have. You were born on third base and spent your whole life convinced you hit a triple. But the game's over now, Natalie. And it turns out you're just not that good of a player. She stood up shaking with rage and walked out. Her mother followed, shooting me a look of pure hatred. 2 of the board members who'd been her allies looked uncomfortable but stayed seated. Anyone else want to leave? I asked pleasantly. Now's the time. Because if you stay, I expect loyalty and competence. I don't care about your history with Uncle Richard or your connections or your tenure. I care about whether you can help me save this company. So, last chance to walk away. No one moved. Robert actually smiled. Excellent. Then let's get to work. The next 6 months were the hardest of my life. Harder than those first weeks after my parents died. Harder than the years of abuse from Uncle Richard. Harder even than building my first company from scratch. Because this time I wasn't just building. I was rebuilding, salvaging, and fighting off attacks from all sides. Natalie didn't go quietly. She leaked stories to the press, claiming I'd stolen the company from her, that I was destroying Uncle Richard's legacy, that I was incompetent and the company was about to collapse. She hired lawyers to contest the will, though. That went nowhere. She even tried to convince some of our contractors to break their agreements. But I was ready for all of it. For every story she planted, I had facts and figures to counter it. For every lawsuit, I had documentation. For every contractor she tried to turn, I had 3 more lined up. And slowly, painfully, the company started to turn around. I sold off the deadweight 5 properties that were draining resources. I renegotiated the terms on our major debts, convincing lenders that I was a better bet than bankruptcy. I brought in 3 new major tenants companies I'd worked with during my consulting days who trusted my vision. By month 4, we were cash flow positive. By month 6, we were actually profitable, barely, but growing. The board that had been skeptical was now cautiously optimistic. Even Thomas Whitfield, the old guard member who'd questioned me, admitted I might know what I was doing. But the real test came at the 6-month mark. A major Chinese investment firm approached us about a partnership on a new development in Hudson Yards. It was the kind of opportunity that could make or break us, a project worth hundreds of millions, with the potential to put Montgomery Estates, or Reynolds Holdings as I was planning to rename it, on the map as a major player again. The catch? They wanted to meet me in person, evaluate whether I was serious or just playing at being a developer. And they wanted Natalie gone completely before they'd sign anything. I scheduled the meeting for a Friday evening at the penthouse. It would be my first time actually staying there overnight since I'd officially taken possession. I'd been to the building, to the office, but I'd avoided the residence itself. Too many memories, too much history. But this meeting required the setting, the power display of owning one of the most expensive residences in Manhattan. The penthouse was exactly as I remembered it, only emptier. Most of Uncle Richard's personal effects had been cleared out. Natalie had taken some things, probably anything valuable, but the bones of the place remained. The floor-to-ceiling windows, the marble and chrome, the view that made you feel like you owned the world. I had the place cleaned and arranged for the meeting. Fresh flowers, good whiskey, a catering team from Le Bernardin. This needed to be perfect. The Chinese investors arrived at 7. 3 of them led by a woman named Lin Wei, who reminded me immediately of myself, sharp and calculating and missing nothing. We made small talk for exactly 10 minutes, then got down to business. Miss Reynolds, we've done our research, Lin Wei said, accepting a glass of wine. Your turnaround of Montgomery Estates is impressive, but we need to understand your vision. Where do you see this company in 5 years? I walked them to the windows, showing them the skyline. There I pointed to a gap in the buildings. And there. And there. 3 developments, all mixed use, all focused on sustainable design and community integration. Not just buildings to house businesses and rich people, but actual neighborhoods that serve multiple income levels and purposes. Ambitious, one of her colleagues said. Also expensive. Yes. Which is why I need partners. You bring capital and expertise in construction technology. I bring market knowledge and local connections. Together we build something neither of us could do alone. Lin Wei studied me. You remind me of someone I used to know. Very driven, very focused. She burned out after 5 years and left the industry completely. I'm not her, I said. I've already been broken down and rebuilt. I know my limits and I know when to ask for help. This partnership isn't just about money. It's about building something sustainable, not just financially, but personally. She smiled. Good answer. But I have one more question. Natalie Whitmore has been spreading rumors that you're unstable, that this turnaround is smoke, and mirrors that the company will collapse as soon as investors like us commit capital. How do you respond? Natalie Whitmore is currently under investigation for embezzlement and fraud. She has every reason to want me to fail because my success proves she was always incompetent. As for the company's stability, you have access to all our financials. Do your own analysis. Don't take my word for it. We already did, Lin Wei said. The numbers are solid. I just wanted to see how you'd respond. My last question is personal. Why are you doing this? You had a successful consulting business. You could have sold it, taken the money, and lived comfortably forever. Why take on this nightmare? I looked out at the city, thinking about the girl who'd walked out of this building 5 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and wounded pride. Because someone once told me I'd never make it in this city, that I'd never amount to anything, that I was just a poor orphan who should be grateful for scraps. I'm doing this to prove them wrong. And because I really, really like proving people wrong. Lin Wei laughed, genuine and delighted. I like you, Claire Reynolds. Let's do business. We signed the partnership agreement that night. It would be announced the following week, a massive vote of confidence that would change the trajectory of the company completely. The project in Hudson Yards would break ground in 6 months with completion scheduled for 2 years later. After they left, I stood alone in the penthouse in the massive living room that used to make me feel so small. Jason had gone home hours ago, the caterers had cleaned up and left, and it was just me and the ghosts of who I used to be. I poured myself a glass of wine and walked through the rooms. The guest room where I'd slept on a narrow bed, grateful for shelter. The kitchen where I'd made breakfast for Uncle Richard and Natalie, serving them like staff. The office where I'd worked late into the night on projects that would be credited to others. It all looked different now. Smaller somehow. Less intimidating. Because I wasn't that scared girl anymore. I was the woman who owned all of this, who'd earned it through skill and determination and refusing to stay broken. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered, curious. Enjoying your little victory, Natalie's voice slurred and bitter. Don't get comfortable. You think you've won, but you haven't. I'll destroy you. I'll destroy everything you've built. You don't deserve any of this. Natalie, I said calmly. Where are you right now? What do you care? Because you sound drunk and I know you're hurting, and despite everything, I don't want you to do something stupid. She laughed harsh and broken. Now you care. After you destroyed my life, I didn't destroy your life. You did that yourself through years of laziness and entitlement and theft. I just stopped enabling it. There's a difference. He was supposed to be mine. The company, the penthouse, everything. I was his favorite. I was the one he loved. No, Natalie. You were the one he found useful. There's a difference. He loved neither of us. We were both just tools to him. The difference is I learned to be more than that, and you never did. Silence on the line. Then quietly, I hate you. I know. But hating me won't make your life better. Maybe it's time to figure out who you are when you're not riding on someone else's money. She hung up. I never heard from her directly again, though I followed her story through the news. She eventually pled guilty to 3 counts of embezzlement, got 2 years probation, and community service. Her mother moved to Florida. The cousins who'd supported her faded away, as fair weather allies always do. The next year passed in a blur of work and growth. Reynolds Holdings, as I officially renamed it, went from strength to strength. The Hudson Yards project became the talk of the industry. I brought in new talent, promoted people based on merit rather than connections, and built a company culture based on competence and innovation rather than politics and exploitation. I also started using my position to help others. I created a mentorship program for young women in real estate, particularly those from non-traditional backgrounds. I funded scholarships for orphan kids trying to go to college. I used my story not to dwell on victimhood, but to show what was possible if you refused to give up. 2 years after taking control, Reynolds Holdings was valued at over $1 billion. I'd turned a dying company into a powerhouse. The penthouse that used to feel like a prison was now my sanctuary, renovated to my taste, filled with light and art, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd earned every inch of it. But the moment that mattered most came on a Tuesday in October. I was working late in my office when Robert Montgomery stopped by. He'd become a real mentor over the past 2 years, and a friend filling in some of the gaps where family should have been. "I brought you something," he said, handing me an old leather notebook. "What is it?" "Richard's journal. I found it when I was cleaning out some of his old things from storage. I thought you should have it." I opened it carefully, seeing Uncle Richard's handwriting notes and thoughts from years ago. Most of it was business-related, dry observations about deals and markets. But toward the end, from the last few months of his life, the tone changed. Saw Claire's name in the Wall Street Journal today. Her company secured funding from 3 major investors. The article called her one of the most promising young developers in New York. She did it without me, without the family name, without any of the advantages I had. I'm not sure whether I feel proud or ashamed. Probably both. I treated her abhorrently. I can admit that now, facing down my own mortality. I saw in her everything I could have been if I had had more courage and less cruelty. So I tried to break her instead of build her up, because that's what cowards do when confronted with their own failures. Natalie will run this company into the ground within 6 months if I leave it to her. She's lazy, entitled, and lacks any real vision. But Claire could make it something magnificent. The question is whether she'd even want it after what I did to her. The question is whether I have any right to ask. My lawyer thinks I'm insane. Maybe I am, but I'm going to rewrite my will tomorrow. I'm giving her everything with conditions to make sure she has the chance to prove herself. It's the least I can do. It's nowhere near enough, but it's all I have left to give. Maybe she'll hate me for it. Maybe she'll refuse it out of spite. But maybe, just maybe, she'll take it and show the world what I always knew she was capable of. Either way, it's her choice now. The way it should have been from the beginning. I closed the journal, my eyes wet. Not for him, not exactly. But for the complicated mess of human emotion and regret, and the way people can be both terrible and trying their best all at once. "He really did see you," Robert said softly. "In the end, he saw you. It doesn't undo what he did," I said. "No, it doesn't. But maybe it explains some of it." I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the empire I'd built from the ashes of his cruelty. And I felt something shift, some old wound finally starting to heal. Not forgiveness, not exactly. But maybe acceptance. Maybe peace. Today I'm 32 years old. I run a company worth billions. I live in a penthouse that used to make me feel worthless and now makes me feel powerful. I mentor dozens of young people trying to break into this industry. I've been featured in Forbes, Fortune, and Business Insider. But none of that matters as much as the moment when I wake up each morning and realize that I belong to myself. That I'm not trying to earn anyone's approval or acceptance. That I've built a life on my own terms with my own hands, owing nothing to anyone. The girl who signed away her inheritance in a desperate bid for family, she's gone. In her place is someone who understands that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about respect and mutual support and choosing to show up for each other. Robert Montgomery is more family to me now than Uncle Richard ever was, because he chose to see me and support me without trying to control or diminish me. Sometimes I still think about Natalie. I heard she moved to Portland, got a normal job in marketing, married someone kind and ordinary. I hope she's happy. I hope she found a way to be herself instead of the person Uncle Richard molded her into. Because that's the thing about breaking free from toxic relationships, you realize that sometimes everyone was trapped just in different ways. The penthouse is mine now, truly mine. I've renovated it completely, erasing the last traces of Uncle Richard's taste and replacing them with my own. The closet I used to sleep in, I turned it into a library floor-to-ceiling books, a reading nook by the window. A reminder that small spaces can become sanctuaries if you approach them the right way. And every morning when I wake up and see the sunrise over Manhattan, I think about that phone call at 3:47 a.m. The moment everything changed. The moment the door opened and I chose to walk through it, not as a victim seeking validation, but as a phoenix rising from ash. Because that's what this story is really about. Not revenge, though there was some satisfaction in proving everyone wrong. Not money, though. Financial security is a gift I never take for granted. This story is about the moment you decide that you're worth more than what others think of you. The moment you stop trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it. The moment you realize that the only approval you need is your own. I built this empire not to prove anything to Uncle Richard or Natalie or anyone else. I built it to prove something to myself. That I was capable. That I was enough. That I could take the worst thing that ever happened to me and transform it into the foundation of something magnificent. So here's what I want to ask you. If you've been in a relationship, any relationship where you're constantly trying to prove your worth, where your sacrifices are invisible and your victories are claimed by others, where you're treated as less than you are, what are you going to do about it? When is your moment to walk away? What would it take for you to bet on yourself? Because I'm telling you, from the other side of that decision, it's worth it. The fear is worth pushing through. The uncertainty is worth embracing. The risk of losing everything is worth it when the alternative is losing yourself. My name is Claire Reynolds. I'm the CEO of Reynolds Holdings. And I'm the woman who turned betrayal into empire ashes into phoenix wings. This is my story. But more importantly, what's yours? If this resonates with you, if you've ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or trapped in someone else's version of your life, hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories of transformation and triumph. And drop a comment below telling me what's the one thing you'd change tomorrow if you had the courage. Let's build a community of people who refuse to stay small just because someone else needs us to be. Let's rise together.